Welcome back to another episode of Honest Conversations with Mo, the Mo Love podcast. It's been about a month since, of course, it's been a minute, but glad to be back once again to another episode. And let's just, of course, as always, let's just get right into it. And I think with this episode, I want to get into talking about how we tune into our competitive nature. In that sense, I mean, how are we tapping our fullest potential when it comes to that urge to want to be the best and do the best within our lives. And I think when it comes into tapping into that creative nature, it's one understanding what it is that fuels you, that inspires you, and that leads to that sense of wanting to be better and greater overall. And then also just how are you going about finding that way to, challenge yourself and, figure out exactly what it is that makes you the best version of yourself when it comes to competition. Because at the end of the day, we're all competing in some sense, whether it's, you're an athlete, competing for, a roster spot, whether you're an individual that set a goal for themselves to get better in the gym and, competing, to see certain results in the gym, or just competing daily to be the best version of yourself every day, or, competing if you do fall into, the category of wanting, whether it is, financially or, monetarily, competing to, of course, make the most money overall, or competing to, if on the shallow end of competing to be the best in another individual's eyes. So I think when we look at competition in some aspect, it is always present and it is always there. So I think, how do you go about kind of course, tapping in and tuning in to that competitive nature of yours is highly important and very, very integral to our own personal beings, but also to how we operate day to day in our lives. I want to then look into kind of that importance of how I said kind of we all have that competitive nature, and kind of look into how do we go about competition versus comparison. I say that in the sense of course, we know competition is that the thing that's challenging us, the thing that is set out to whether it's a goal, whether it's something you're looking to obtain. I feel like that is competition, or something to overcome, or someone to overcome in a sense, and that is competition versus comparison. I feel like when I always look at the term comparison, it's comparing sins, and looking to see how you can be better than the other person based off of what they may or may not have done. Versus when you're competing, you're looking to see how can you get better without, and that's better for yourself and not necessarily in the eyes of, the other person, or, because I mean, obviously we all have an audience, whether it's our own, internal audience, whether it's the audience that we have out there, the public, those that are, cheering for us. And, in some sense, we always, know that we have an audience. So I think when we're looking at competition versus comparison, is fundamentally how are you really looking at the manners in which you're going about being not only the best version of yourself, like I said, but going about how do you overcome those challenges and obstacles that you feel are in your path, that you feel seem so insurmountable that you just sometimes feel like it's unconquerable, something that you just can't get over. And then when you look at comparison, you're just constantly looking at other people's journeys and balancing out whether the grades match. If you think about back in school, and you used to ask a friend on what did they get on their algebra exam, or exactly what grade. Let's say they got a A and you got a B plus, and you constantly comparing, maybe I should have studied harder, or what did they do better than I did. You start self-doubting yourself in that sense. And I think when we let go of comparing and start focusing on competing for ourselves instead of competing for others, it's vital and it's important because it helps you really unlock the true potential not only of your nature, but also really understand what you're capable of. And I think when you're competing for the wrong reasons, and I mean in that sense of comparing your journey to other people, I think you get lost in the end goal that you've set for yourself. And that goal doesn't seem as realistic or doesn't seem as meaningful, because once you get to that goal, and you once again go back and compare it to other people, you realize, oh, okay, now I have to do this, or dang, I guess it wasn't as worthwhile. Because at the end of the day, we, as we all know, that's cliche as it sounds, we're all on our own journeys, and we're all trying to figure ourselves out day by day. But I think when we get caught up in comparing ourselves to other people instead of figuring out that true competitive nature within ourselves and what inspires us and what encourages us to get up every day, whether it's the smallest thing from, lighting a candle, late at night and journaling, to, meditating, or to, like I said, you know, finding ways to wake up at, whatever crack of dawn that you do, or whatever's, within whatever works for you, as far as your plans or your approach to things, whether it's the gym, whether it's your diet, your nutrition, your mental, professionally, romantically. I think it's very important to figure out the things that fuel you, and also be true to understanding what exactly works for you, in terms of hey, this not might not work for me because this isn't me, and so I think it's also important to be honest and respectful to yourself in that sense, and not really, like I said, go back and get caught up in comparing sins with other people, knowing that their journey and their pathway is completely different from yours, and it's never going to align, it's never going to match. And it's, you gotta continue to be a competitor for you, continue to compete in that sense. And then what I want to get into next is kind of that being driven, kind of without, that lack of, without being, disconnected. And I think when it comes to the internal drive you have for yourself, you got to know, of course, it's important to disconnect in terms of knowing when to rest, and knowing, what operating or OS system, kind of works for you in that sense. But I think it's also integral that when you're focused on kind of that drive and what's driving you, that you're not allowing yourself to get disconnected from your own personal end goal, from knowing, hey, I can check off this, and also understanding your pace. And I think that's the important thing in terms of what I mean when I'm saying this, in terms of kind of that drive without being disconnected. And I mean that disconnect from yourself, so I think when you're disconnected from who you are, you definitely lack that drive and lack that inspiration. And it's natural, and it happens. And you're not going to be perfect every day. And no one expects you to be. I think it's important to know that your drive obviously comes with time, but knowing that it's gonna be an uphill battle. It's gonna be, a journey worth figuring out. But as long as you don't allow yourself to stay, become disconnected from your own being and getting caught up in, the nuances of who you want to be over who you need to be in that moment, is when, all things, seem to evolve into chaos. And I say in the sense of when, for example, when we're fueled by, let's say like money, for instance, we all want to, create a lifestyle for ourselves, worthwhile, and, of course, manageable, and, want to do all the things that we want to do. So, for example, want to take a trip, heading into, obviously we're getting close to the end of the year. So, for the new year, want to take certain trips and have those set goals. So it's about understanding, hey, what works for you and what system is in place that works for you, and not getting caught up in, I have to, be able to take this amount of trips because I'm seeing all this happening all around me, and the people around me are being able to do this and that. No, just understand what works within your budget, and what does a trip look like for you. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything outrageous, anything, as long as you're able to take that time away from yourself, I think is essential. And I think, obviously I was saying, that's just kind of an example of how sometimes we get caught up in the difference between where we lack, that disconnect because we lack that motivation of who are we being. We get so lost sometimes, when we feel down, we feel depressed, and feeling uninspired, that it's easy to get caught up in comparison mode, versus when we do have that high energy and things seem to be clicking right, that it gets lost on us, that sometimes we become, we're being our worst enemies, that our drive isn't ever disconnected. It becomes disconnected when we choose to unplug, when we choose to have those negative thoughts and those negative feelings about ourselves, that gets us in this whirlwind cycle of who we feel like we need to be, or who we feel like we've got to be, when all you gotta do is be yourself. And I think that's the most important thing, because we gotta also remember that regardless, at the end of the day, that bad luck streak or a good luck streak doesn't last forever. And I think going into that is also knowing, how do we balance, or how do we turn our inner critic to our inner coach? And obviously our inner critic can be, that, whether it's the voice inside of you telling you, you're not capable of something, that, hey, you're not worthy of, whether it's, a promotion, whether you feel like you're incapable of losing, those 25 pounds that you set for yourself, or whether you are just feeling so, apathetic about life, and, feeling like, oh, you can't get the girl you want because, she's not, she doesn't think you're, attractive enough. But I think, or you feel like you're not attractive enough, for that, and that person, you feel like, oh, they're out of my league, that constant inner critic, poking at you, feeling like you're not worthy enough. And I think when we understand our self-worth, that it's easier to turn that critic to a coach, in the sense of that coach that's, calling the plays, calling the shots, and knowing, hey, as long as I do this and this can help me get here. And I think sometimes we forget to turn off that critic, and, or not necessarily, well, yeah, turn off that critic and allow it to, evolve into a coach. And I think when we become our own coaches, for what we want to see for ourselves in life, I think it's also being a coach and knowing what doesn't work out for you either. Whether, obviously, we see, whether it's, all the time in sports, a play that doesn't work out, you're not constantly gonna, keep running, that same play, just hoping for different results. And, yeah, you can bring up that play maybe in the future, but I think when you're constantly spamming, the same play over and over, you obviously constantly see the same results you're getting over and over, in life as well. So I think when we're able to alter and adjust, hey, what adjustments are we making? Are we, listening to our bodies, listening to our minds, listening to, our souls and our beings, just overall, trusting our intuitions of what works for us and what doesn't. And I think that's how we turn that inner critic to, that inner coach, to allow ourselves to be who we see that we're truly capable of. And I think sometimes we forget that we're capable of so much, that it's easy with, social media and, the internet overall, that, I think I often say is, we've become, I think, going back to the disconnect, we become so disconnected, that of what, what we're trying to figure out, what inspires us, that we get so caught up in, it's easily get caught up in, the facade of what we've got to be just to seem desirable, seem, noteworthy or, viral in that sense. But when you understand what works for you, it's easy, and it makes things easier, not only in your life, but easier on the heart, easier on the mind, easier, on your being. And easier on your body just overall, and trusting that gut feeling of, hey, this is exactly where I need to be, and I know exactly where I'm gonna go, and I don't have to rush the process. And knowing, hey, sometimes, like I said, going back to, remembering that the good luck or the bad luck streak doesn't last forever. Hey, sometimes you're gonna lose 4 or 5 games consecutively. You're gonna have, like I said, in that sense of, 4 or 5 bad weeks. But then at the same time, you might have 3 to 6 months, that are going so smoothly and so amazingly. So I think it's understanding not only the balance, but just being able to enjoy, the roller coaster ride that is life overall. And I think it's so much easier when we're listening to that coach, or allowing our that inner voice to be a coach over a critic, because we're not downplaying ourselves as much, and we're not getting lost into getting lost in what we're capable of, in our abilities overall. And when you realize, what's possible, it makes life that much more enjoyable. And to be able to be willing to enjoy things becomes easier. To, step outside your comfort zone becomes easier. To become a bit more vulnerable becomes a bit more easier. So I think I encourage you all to kind of, find that way to turn that inner critic to, an inner coach, and it doesn't have to be a rapid adjustment, because it's not going to be something you can instantly, turn on instantly. But I think it's, how are you going about, and I say that in terms of, how does it work for you? What is your methodology of, turning that inner critic to an inner coach? So, just figure that out for yourself, and it'll become easier. And then, of course, next, speaking of coaches, we're jumping to the NFL, and, quickly touch on my Falcons these last few weeks. Speaking of, that bad luck streak, it seems, for my Falcons throughout these few weeks. Obviously, we just won this past week, week 15, Thursday night football, over this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Game-winning field goal. Kyle Pitts had a career day. Kirk Chains was back again. It was funny to see, but like I said, coach wise, Coach Raheem is going to be interesting if he's able to keep his job. It's been a tough season. I still say, as much as I rocked with Zach early in the days and was a big, fan of his, but I think it's interesting to see what Coach Raheem ends up doing, if he does keep his job, and if we, keep Zach Robinson on staff, for our offense, what ends up happening to our team. And I know the season's not over, but it's pretty much over in Atlanta. But we're obviously 5-9 now. But then, I don't know, it's interesting. But yeah, the NFL season has been fun. Not fun for me, but fun for everybody else. Fun in the city out here, in the city of Charlotte. The Panthers are winning, so they currently lead the division, because we obviously helped them with our win over Tampa Bay. So Carolina's, fighting to maintain and, secure a playoff spot. The Patriots and Broncos still sit atop the AFC. The Colts have fallen off a cliff, in the sense of, obviously, due to injuries. Lost, Daniel Jones for the season. Obviously lost Anthony Richardson. Brought back 44-year-old Phillip Rivers onto their practice squad. I think Riley Leonard is supposed to play tomorrow, but it'll be interested. The Ravens clawed their way back into their divisional battle, but obviously lost last week, after, I want to say, they had won 5 straight at the time since getting Lamar Jackson back. The Eagles are looking very shaky, obviously, after a promising start. Offense is looking horrendous. Questions of, Jalen Hurts and his overall his job, and kind of the overall offense there in Philly. The Lions still lead the pack in the NFC. The Bills have been up and down throughout the year, but I still feel they'll be solid contenders going into the playoffs. Obviously second in the AFC East behind the Patriots. The AFC South. Oh my gosh, what fun they're having out there in the AFC South. I mean, the battle out there between the Texans, the Jags, and the Colts, and who comes out top. That division is going to be interesting to close out the season. Patty Mahomes and the Chiefs might not make the playoffs. Obviously, offense has been a struggle this season, but obviously the last few weeks, as I said, we 12 through 15 of the league has been interesting as we head closer and closer to the playoffs. Who comes out on top? As I said, especially I'm looking at the AFC South and the NFC South. Whether the Panthers clinch it for the city or they find some way to also once again choke it. To be interested. Well, my Falcons, obviously we don't own our pick, so it'll go to the Rams nonetheless, our first round pick this year. So it'll be interesting how we decide to close out the season, if it's enough to save Raheem Morris's job. But the downhill season has been very, very interesting. And then I think, next time we'll get into the MVP race, because that's obviously shifted. Obviously, Baker Mayfield is no longer in the running. He's, fell off a bit of a cliff himself as well. Drake may be the favorite. Obviously, I think Jonathan Taylor had a chance, but I was questioning if they would give it to a running back. But I think it might be Drake May's to lose, which is interesting to say. But he's been having a heck of a season, an amazing year, so it'll be interesting. But that's the NFL thus far. As we said, as we get closer and closer to the playoffs, it'll be interesting. I'm definitely tapped into the AFC South, though. That is so much fun. And then shifting gears to the NBA, my Lakers are not in the Emirates NBA Cup tonight. Currently, I think the Magic are playing the Knicks, and then we got the later game of the Spurs and OKC in the Emirates NBA Cup this weekend. It should be interesting. I think for my pick, I'm gonna go with. Obviously, haven't checked the score of the Orlando game in a while, but I'm gonna go Orlando versus. I'm gonna go upset Spurs. I know OKC 25-1, 24-1, something like that. They're cooking, but I think with the Spurs getting Wemby back, they just need one game, and this might be the game. They're looking amazing. Obviously, they cooked my Lakers, which we struggle against young athletic teams. It's very noticeable. All of our losses have been against those respective teams and have all been in blowout fashion because we don't have the foot speed and the athleticism on our roster to compete with those young and athletic teams. So it's going to be interesting as we get near. I think players that become available, I want to say it's like in next week in December of, obviously contract signed from this past off season or free agent signed from this past off season that become available now. But it's interesting what we do with our roster construction, better our roster. And I'm not trying to rush to, trades or anything, but I think it's very obvious that if we want to win a championship this year, obviously in the top 2-3 in the West right now, currently as we sit, that we've got to retool some things if we want to be formidable playoff contenders. So it'll be interesting what we do. Obviously, like I said, I don't know. Also, I don't know why I love JJ, but the rosters and our lineups and limiting to 9 to 10 guys most nights. JJ, it's the regular season. I get it. Cut that thing there come playoff time. But regular season, throw everybody out there. And I think it allows not only a bit more flexibility to the roster, because I don't want, and I guess I'm just saying this for like certain players, like the fact Vando's not playing more and Gabe Vincent, who's clearly obviously we know Vando's liabilities on the offensive end, to keep throwing out undersized Gabe Vincent against these wings is insane. Not using Nick Smith Jr. more as a secondary ball handler off the bench and a guy who can, jumpstart our offense a bit more off the bench and not giving him more tick. Obviously, understanding, yeah, he's on a two-way. I get that. But I think a bit more spark that we need, to our offense and especially to our bench is very vital. Obviously, the worst bench in the NBA. I forget how much we average, but we are, dead last in bench scoring in the league. So it's like, hey, just figure out, that additional spark play. And then, no, we don't have too many issues, obviously, offensively. We got Luka, we got Braun, Cookie, Aiton's been solid. Ruby does his thing. And just knowing, obviously, with our big three with, Braun, AR, and Luka, they're going to do their things. Obviously, AR's out for the week with a calf strain, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to be interesting to see how we bounce back in that sense. Yeah, Lakers are going to be interesting as we continue the season. We're still looking good. I just, after seeing game after game, getting smacked by young and athletic teams, we got to figure something out because come playoff time, that's what we're going to face. We're not going to get the whistles. We're not going to get the calls. The game's going to slow down. Yeah, it'll help us a bit, but our guys, especially Luka and AR, depend on getting to the line. And when those whistles get tight, we see how they react and easy, fast break points. But yeah, we got to figure it out just kind of overall. But still, still happy about how my Lakers, obviously looking thus far, the last few games have been a bit shaky, but we're still looking good. But back to the NBA, to the Emirates NBA Cup out in Vegas this weekend. It should be a good one. And like I said, I'm gonna go with Spurs Magic, and I'm gonna go with Spurs winning it all this year in the NBA Emirates Cup. And then just want to jump in, of course, into the top four. Currently my favorite album is Wale's album. Wow, why am I blanking on the name all of a sudden? I'm definitely blanking on the name of that album. Dang. Why am I blanking on his album? I'm certainly blanking. It is insane. Everything. Wow, I am legit blanking on my guy Wale's album. And I love it so much. Like Power and Problems, fire. Mirror on a Benz, fire. Lonely, fire. Belly, fire. Yeah, this album is solid. The R&B samples hit. And for some reason, I am still blanking on the name. Well, but let's see. I don't know why my mind went blank, but it happens. But yeah, that's been my favorite album thus far. Wale's latest album. The name's gonna come to me as I obviously. Everything is a lot. That's the name. Why am I blanking? I think because he's usually comes with like quicker, more about nothing, etc. As far as different names, I don't know why this one, as much as I've listened to it, the name has slipped my mind. But fire album by Wale. He's been cooking. And been getting heavy into like the different sounds of listening back on the different sounds of this year that I've been tapping into, and just what I've enjoyed just kind of this far from earlier this year to now. So that's been fun listening to the different playlists that Apple Music makes in the For You section. Y'all know me, I still keep that heavily rotated mix, consistently in the rotation. So definitely been tapped into that. And then favorite shows to watch currently. I'm watching Billions and finishing out the last few seasons of it. Obviously watched it a while back and completely forgot I never finished it. So finishing that now. What did I finish recently that I really enjoyed? I'm blanking on these shows now. Oh man, I feel like I was just telling somebody about a recent show that I was watching, and it's now just blanking. Obviously, my favorite shows: The Neighborhood, FBI, Abbott Elementary. What was that show? It was so good. All Her Fault was good. That was a good one that I recently watched. It was another show that I was watching. I Love LA is pretty good. The Cherry Company is real good. What else have I been watching recently? That's another show. This is gonna bug me. Dang, I'm gonna be thinking about this. But yeah, those have been some of the shows I've been watching. Oh, wow. Finished The Last Frontier. There we go. The Last Frontier. That was finally finished that. That was pretty good. I feel like it was another Apple TV show I was watching, but I can't remember if it was another one. Loot, obviously, that's another good feel good one. I think yeah, that's been pretty much all the shows I've been watching currently, and I've been enjoying. What do I currently have going on? I'm kind of just been figuring out like kind of recapping on not only just this year and figuring out the good, bad, and ugly, and kind of being just taking that introspective look at the year and just learning, like, hey, taking it all in from this past year, you know the things I'm proud about myself for accomplishing, the things I could have done better, the things that I need to work on and improve upon, and just taking lessons from everything, the people I was able to connect, the places I was able to go, and just kind of reflecting back on the year. Like I said, even in the sense of like listening back to the music that I've enjoyed throughout this year. So I think that's really what I've been doing of late and got going on. And then what I'm looking forward to is just from that is looking into the new year as I come up with the themes for next year. As y'all know,